So welcome everyone. My name is Carmel Tanaka and I am the founder and executive director of JQT Vancouver, a volunteer-run Jewish queer and trans nonprofit dedicated to queering Jewish spaces and Jewifying queer spaces. With gratitude, our work takes place on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. The purpose of Twice Blessed 2.0, the Jewish LGBTQ2SIA Initiative, is to understand the current needs of the Jewish queer and trans community. Part of the initiative was a self-identification survey conducted by JQT Vancouver in partnership with JFS Vancouver and with the support of the Jewish Federation of Greater Vancouver. I am so happy to have the support of the CEO of JFS, Tanya DeMeo, who will share a few words at the end. A few housekeeping rules: please stay on mute. Questions will be answered at the end. This will take the full hour and there will be lots of data being covered. It's being recorded so you can study it at a later time in further detail and will be posted onto our socials and website. I've enabled live transcribing for those who would like subtitles. This presentation contains the findings from the survey collected between February 2nd, 2022 to March 27th, 2022. In this presentation, data points from the 2022 survey are also compared to data points from a community needs assessment conducted by JFS in 2004. Twice Blessed, the Jewish LGBT project, needs assessment of the Jewish LGBT community in the Greater Vancouver area. For full transparency, the survey was conducted, but only resurfaced in 2021 during an interview with Jacqueline Walters, who conducted the 2004 survey for JQT's BC Jewish Queer and Trans Oral History Project. Jacqueline is in attendance today and thrilled to see this work continued, and I'm honored that you are here. And here's a clip from that interview.
I did get quite a bit of trepidation, though, mostly about, are you going to let the ball drop here? Because we're really tired of being studied as a group and nothing happening. And fair enough. So yeah, that's my greatest disappointment with it all.
Had the survey and you continued on with Jewish Family Services Agency, what would you have liked to have seen happen?
Definitely more LGBT contribution, involvement, more open spaces, more safety, recognizing the contribution they have to offer the Jewish community. Events that were specifically, how can we say, interesting to folks of other ways of being in the world. And building bridges, building as many bridges as we could between the Jewish community and the Jewish school and the Jewish community center and all these Jewish resources that we have. So yeah, that's what I would like to have seen. I really didn't want to drop the ball. That's what I really didn't want to do. So
now you're on record saying that you wanted to continue.
Yeah, I can, please. Yes, I'd like to be on record for that. And apologies to all those folks who were involved that I wasn't able to do that. Because I do think it's important. I think inclusiveness in general is very important. And it's just something that my own struggle with Judaism too, around its kind of the rigid roles and rules that out people. And so, yeah, I have my own issues with that kind of way of being in the world. And I don't think that's, I'm not sure that fits with our ethos either, our way of being in the world, you know, so.
Can you describe your reaction receiving the email and invitation from me and JQT Vancouver and saying that we're doing a oral history project on LGBTQ Jews across the decades in BC?
Well, I was thrilled, because now I can speak about this study. We can make it more public, and somebody's picking up the ball. Thank you. So yeah, thrilled to be a part of it. Very happy to contribute, and more than willing to send you my executive summary and any of my research. So yeah, thank you for picking up. So very excited, and just the thought that I might have done something that might have made a difference to folks that are defined as different in whatever way is great. Fits right up there with supporting. It's you know, it's a mitzvah.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. It's an honor again for you to be here and for us to be able to continue this work together. And it was really Jacqueline, with the support of Selena Robinson, whose son would eventually become JQT's first chair and current past chair, that got the ball rolling on this, and I'm honored to be the one to bring their work forward today. It's time to dive into the data. This is what we're all been waiting for. We are offering today only an overview and highlights from a much more robust report, which is yet to come and will be released at the end of the month, and we'll have over 100 pages of data, so stay tuned for that. Let's begin. So in 2004, the number of participants was 56. The number doubled in 2022 to a total of 111. Of those who participated, 3 actually did do the survey back in 2004. And you might be wondering how 103 don't add up to 111. So it's important for us to note that there was really only one question that was required to complete the survey. That was the consent question. All the other 44 questions were optional, so some people chose to skip. The demographic age range expanded in 2022 to include youth and elders, giving us a better cross-selection of folks. Now, while this survey was primarily for people living in the GVRD, with the Greater Vancouver Regional District, we received submissions from people across BC and even a request to do programming in Victoria, which again alludes to the need for work in this area. This was an interesting question. How many years people lived in Canada? Because it relates directly to waves of immigration to Canada. In 2004, there were many US expats participating in the survey. And what's interesting is the majority of people who filled out the survey now either have lived all of their lives here or most of their lives here. In terms of languages spoken, there was a decrease in the number of languages spoken, or diversity of many languages spoken. This makes sense with the number of years lived in Canada. So we're not sure how much this means in terms of has there been less immigration or not. This is something that we may need to dig further into. In terms of gender identity, there's been a significant increase in transgender and non-conforming identities. For the most part, it's been the same for cisgender as well as women and men, but that is the major difference between the 2 decades. I just received a note that it's coming out. Can you hear me better now? Is that okay? Yeah, okay. In terms of sexual orientation, language and terminology has evolved and expanded. In 2004, there were really only 4 options: lesbian, gay, bisexual, and other. And today, the vocabulary is quite a bit more, and we see a lot more diversity. Now, the question of are you out? Was a very interesting question to compare. We see a shift from people being out only to friends around 2004 to today. The majority of people are out in both Jewish and queer communities. Something worth noting is that there are more that people are more being out as queer in Jewish community than there is being out as Jewish in queer community. Two questions in the 2 survey are on ethnicity and race, and I have to say that a lot has changed in the past 2 decades, especially how we discuss and relate to race. We still need to crunch this data, and we'll have a better breakdown in our final report. But for now, in 2004, we had 9 who were Jewish only, 31 who were Jewish and then some, and 11 who don't identify as Jewish. And in 2022, we have 51 who identify as Ashkenazi and 56 who are another ethnicity or ethnicities. Again, we will break this down further, but you can see that there's quite a list of options. All of our questions most of them were open-ended, so people could identify however they wished, and not necessarily choose from a drop-down menu, but could share what their identities were. So we see everything from Celtic stock to Jafrican to Jewish to Japanese to Mizrahi, white, and further. So again, we will have more details for you shortly. Stay tuned. Now, in terms of race, back in 2004, the question was nationality and culture. So we don't have the data from 2004 specifically on race, but in 2022, we asked how people identify as a race. And here are the results. Majority, or at least, yeah, majority identify as white at 42, Caucasian at 27, and another race at 30. But you can see here that there's many diverse answers, from Asian to Latinx to Southeast Asian to white, passing to you name it. So lots of diversity in the Jewish community. In 2004, health needs was an open-ended question and had a variety of responses ranging from cat allergies to HIV. And in 2022, we asked specifically about disability and neurodiversity. A third identify as disabled, and a quarter identify as neurodivergent. And folks specified the disability and neurodivergency, and these are some of the most common. It's not a full list. We'll have a full list in the final report, but in terms of disabilities, mental health, chronic pain, anxiety, autism, ADHD, depression, limited mobility. And in terms of neurodivergency, ADHD, autism, anxiety, and PTSD. So how are people on this survey, and compared to, or not even compared to 2004, but just in general, what is one's connection to being Jewish? So the title is Jewishness. How were people raised Jewishly or not? And how do they identify Jewishly today? And the two religious movements most folks were raised in were conservative and reform. Many, though, were also raised culturally or secularly Jewish. Today, a renewal and spiritual Judaism have significantly increased, and being culturally Jewish has skyrocketed. And we also have a whole bunch of more options: Jewish, Jibu, and Jew by choice. Now, we also asked people if they practice any other religions, cultures, traditional practices, and or ways of life, and a third of the participants said yes. And there are many different forms, everything from atheism to Buddhism to xʷməθkվəy to Easter to paganism, Islam, meditation, tarot, yoga. So yeah, quite a wide variety. Now, in terms of relationships, this is a very interesting question for us, with same-sex marriage only being legalized in 2003. So remember, 2003, it's only a year before the 2004 survey. We are seeing a much larger group married, and with that comes engagements. Something new in our survey, which isn't new at all by any means, but certainly there's more openness around it than ever before, and that is polyamory. People were asked if, for those who are with other people, what kind of relationships do you have? And half of the people who said that they are in relationships are in multi-faith, racial, ethnic, cultural relationships. I mean, I'm a product of one. Now, in terms of involvement in the Jewish community over the past 2 decades, I gotta say it's pretty comparable from 2004 to 2022. Not much has changed in terms of, you know, the big ticket items are cultural involvement, spiritual involvement, and religious involvement in the Jewish community. The only new one, truly, that I found quite interesting is the fact that there's a way to be involved online now, online in the Jewish community. Now, we don't have 2004 data on queer and trans involvement, so we can't compare that, but we did ask the question in our most updated survey. And the top areas are involvement in the queer and trans community, pride celebrations, recreational, political, and artistic. And again, online involvement comes up. For the level of affiliation to both communities on a scale of 1 to 10, we see an increase in involvement, or at least affiliation in the Jewish community between 2004 to 2022. We don't have data in 2004 for the level of affiliation to queer community. However, in line with the "are you out" question, there is less affiliation in queer community than in Jewish community. The importance of involvement of queer-friendly Jewish activities for oneself is roughly about the same, but we do see a significant drop on the importance of involvement in queer-friendly Jewish activities for one's families. I have more data to crunch for our final report, as we also asked about age-specific programming and whether people want group-specific programming. This will help us get a better understanding of family needs as well. But considering that a lot of the families, half probably, are mixed and multiracial and all of the above, it's important to know that the trends that are coming and are currently experienced by the Jewish community. When asked if people have accessed Jewish community services or activities, 85 people said yes, 23 said no, and we asked why not. These were some of the reasons. Lack of LGBTQ informed staff, cultural or religious beliefs, feeling unwelcomed, fear of judgment, politics, financial difficulties, and in some of the lesser categories, pandemic, Zionism, support for Israel government, not interested, unaware, disconnection, fear of being perceived as Zionist by the queer community. Of those who said yes, in that they did access community services in the Jewish community, and as well as various other services, we asked what their experience was like. Remember, there were 111 people who participated in this survey and 111 responses to this very question, which means everyone answered this question. In short, 3/4 had a positive experience, but 1/4 had a negative experience. Folks go into further detail as well. That'll all go into the final report. So this is interesting data to also have. Now, there were 2 sections specific for Jewish queer seniors and Jewish queer youth. This is what people had to say about senior care and entering long-term care as queer Jewish seniors. I am quite frightened. As a transgendered Jew, long-term care is a frightening prospect, as transgendered seniors are often abused in long-term care. It's scary. As I am getting closer to that age, I would look for an LGBTQ senior home before looking for a Jewish one. If we could combine the two, that will be ideal. I don't know where I'll go. I do not want to go to a senior's residence that is heavily generic Christian, that makes a big deal of Christmas and Easter and Valentine's Day, that has church services. I will not be comfortable. Worry that my relationship will not be seen as real. I fear that it will be primarily heterosexual and that I will have to go back into the closet. These are just a handful of responses, many of which say similar things. And there's plenty more to the survey, which will be addressed also in the final report. I would like to move on to observations. So at the time the 2004 survey was conducted, the Jewish community was grappling with same-sex marriage right across the denominations. First, conservative Jewish and lesbian marriages took place in 1992, but due to the community division, it stopped. Rabbis were split on same-sex law in 1997. The renewal movement began to address this in 2000. That same year, the reform movement makes a resolution on same-gender officiation, but the first reform gay wedding in Vancouver isn't until 2008. BC legalizes same-sex marriage in 2003, only a year before the survey, as mentioned. The rabbis continued to battle over this in 2005. The conservative movement in North America adopted same-sex marriage in 2006, but it divides the congregation in Vancouver. An email is sent by the president of the synagogue approving the union of same-sex couples in 2016. And their first conservative gay marriage is in 2020, just before the pandemic. And if anyone is listening to this 30, 40 years from now, the pandemic is the COVID-19 pandemic. You can learn about all of this on the BC Jewish Queer and Trans Oral History Project. We have a timeline and it's super juicy. There are fantastic links to articles in the Jewish Western Bulletin, today's Jewish Independent, for further research and education. So that's 2004 in terms of historical and social context. Now in 2022, the Jewish community is no longer grappling with same-sex marriage between two Jews. That's pretty much been taken care of aside from the Orthodox community. The hot topics today, and this is what we're seeing in the survey, are a growing trend away from religious Judaism towards cultural Jewish identity due to increase in intermarriage, as well as a continued lack of accessibility, inclusion, acceptance of all marginalized Jews on the periphery of the Jewish community, and an increasing divisiveness on Israel and Palestine. So what's different in 2022? Participation doubled and the age range expanded to include youth and elders. Identity, language, terminology, and survey design practices are much more inclusive. A third engage in other religions, cultures, traditional practices, and/or ways of life. A third are disabled, a quarter are neurodivergent, and half are in multi-faith, etc. relationships. And something that I personally had to deal with is that there was homophobic and anti-Semitic social media trolling that was extremely vitriolic and incessant upon boosting and promoting the participation of this survey. What's the same in 2022? Lack of accessibility, visibility, acceptance of diversity in the Jewish community, mediocre involvement in Jewish community and even less in queer and trans community, and community needs outweigh available capacity and resources. So recommendations in 2004 were education of community leaders, rabbis, Jewish services, Jewish schools and synagogues, Jewish presence and outreach at LGBT activities in the Greater Vancouver community, stronger network of LGBT Jewish community to invite onto Jewish communities, committees and boards, LGBT presence at Jewish events such as Jewish Film Festival, Sgsmåx, and Jewish Book Fair. Updates since 2004. All of the 2004 recommendations still apply. These are very much the same things that our community is asking today in 2022. But since then, there have been a bunch of wins, many of which are featured in the BC Jewish Queer and Trans Oral History Project timeline. And what I would like to share with you are some of the more recent highlights in the past couple of years. JQT is the first Jewish LGBTQ2SIA+ nonprofit in Vancouver, as well as in BC, and currently the only one in operation in Canada. JQT is the only Jewish community partner of Vancouver Pride Society and tabled for the first time in 2021. JQT partnered with the Jewish Film Festival in 2021 for the first time. The first LGBTQ presence at the JCC's community-wide Hanukkah marketplace was in 2021 when JQT tabled and the Lesbians were invited to perform. In Vancouver, there is only one openly gay Jewish man and only one openly queer Jewish woman of color in executive leadership positions in the Jewish community and its organizations, and the latter is a volunteer. I know, because that is me. It's important to note that the environment is changing, but it's still slow and we haven't seen as much progress as I've liked based on what people were saying already back in 2004. So, calls to action in 2022. Allocate campaign funding for operational costs of providing year-round Jewish LGBTQ programming for all ages and community outreach in both Jewish and LGBTQ communities. Develop inclusive care services for Jewish LGBTQ seniors. Hire JQT to consult an ongoing commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Partner with us on community-wide and specific programming and projects. Adopt and breathe the concept of nothing about us without us. And listen to us when we say that and when we call out performative allyship. Signage does not make an organization inclusive. Actions speak louder than words. Further, amplify Jewish queer and trans artists, performers, and activists. Clearly state your stance on LGBTQ rights and accessibility on your websites, newsletters, social media. Pride flags are great, but not enough. Adopt zero tolerance on homophobic, transphobic, and anti-Semitic language, teachings, policies, and practices. And develop an anonymous reporting mechanism to provide feedback without repercussions to the Jewish queer and trans community. That concludes our presentation for the highlights from the 2022 survey. Thank you very much. Please stay tuned for the 100-page report that will be released later this month. At this time, I am going to invite Tanya DeMejo to share a few words.
Thanks, Carmel. Thank you everybody for making the time tonight. It's Sunday, so I really appreciate that you're making time for the report, and a lot of interesting things. Just listening, Carmel came up for myself as well, even though Carmel and I have spent so much time over the last few months. A big thank you to Jacqueline, since we really learned about the work that you've done, and after Carmel presented the initial results, I found that it's very important for JFS to take a lead in this work, maybe not necessarily for the community, but definitely for us as an agency, that we really understand what are the challenges that LGBTQ community is facing and what are their experiences with JFS. And I believe that really our work is just starting. It was great that we did have the participation that we had, and I'm very appreciative of the fact that people did take the time to answer all of these questions, and there were so many details that we asked about. And it is super important for us that we don't let them down this time, and that really the results and the feedback that we received, we move ahead with that, and we really define the priorities and act on that. Of course, there's so much set there, and for sure, we won't be able to do all at once. But as I said, it is very important for me personally and professionally that we don't let the community down, and that we don't do another research in 10 years just to find that the recommendations are pretty much the same. So once again, big kudos to you, Jacqueline, for taking the lead on this in 2004, for sharing all of this with Carmel. And I'm super proud of the work that's been done so far, and really looking forward to the next steps.
So much, Tanya. I think it's, it goes to show that also to have your support in order to make this happen is very important and integral to the work that we do. So also a big thank you to you. We look forward to working together closely with JFS and the Jewish community on next steps, because as Tanya mentioned, and also Jacqueline did, the time to study our community is now done. It's time to take action. So thank you very much for being here today, and we will see you all very soon.